Chapter 511, Snitch Halo, Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas Studios Whoosh. A strong gale blew out from Bishop Millet's body, lifting up his dark blue bishop robes. Crack. 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 The branches of the nearby trees snapped as they flew into the air. Donna's body involuntarily rose a few meters into the air before being thrown out several meters. Her body ached all over when she fell to the ground. It wasn't just her, Cecile, Denton, Timothy, Harris, and the others were all blown up by the wind and landed in different spots. Only Cleves, Teague, and Erdy, either because of their training or abnormally heavy weight, staggered to the ground and tumbled a few times. Eland, who was facing Bishop Millet directly, did a series of retreating and backward somersaulting actions, dodging the incoming blow from the wind. Klein and Danitz didn't attempt to resist it head-on, instead, they flew backward like kites. Although they looked like they were about to collapse to the ground, they ultimately managed to keep their balance. As soon as the hurricane stopped, 6 figures emerged from the dispersing fog. They were all wearing black cloaks and were headless. Left with only bleeding necks, their hoods were supported up by the eddies of the hurricane. Gasp! Gasp! Their throats emitted the low grunts of a beast like the moment before they were ready to attack. So. A series of thin and sharp wind blades shot out, leaving a clear and deep rift where Klein was somersaulting. Tap! 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 From both sides of the lantern-wielding Bishop Millet, whose dark blue bishop robe had flared up slightly, 6 headless men rushed at Klein, Eland, and the others, stomping on the ground until it trembled. One headless monster is already hard enough to deal with, but now there are 6 of them. And there's even a bishop who's obviously corrupted. When Blazing Danitz saw this scene, he couldn't help but feel his scalp tingle. At this moment, a bronze beam streaked past his eyes and shot into the distance. Dang! 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 Azek's copper whistle dropped to the ground and bounced a few times. With a whoosh, the 6 headless men changed direction at the same time, rushing towards the location where Azek's copper whistle came to a stop, leaving Bishop Millet standing alone in his original spot. Klein seized the opportunity, lifted his left hand, tearing off the sun brooch inside his coat, and threw it to Captain Eland who was closest to him. He shouted succinctly, "Inject your spirituality." 5 seconds. Holy water. After saying this, he ignored his silk top hat that had been blown away, and instead, he bent his body, dashing towards Bishop Millet in a zigzag manner. So. One after another, wind blades were shot out in close succession, all of them aimed at Klein. In a flash, the ground showed signs of being cut and slashed. Klein either somersaulted, lunging forward, or jumping up by supporting his body with his hands to avoid the first round of concentrated fire. The dark red light in Bishop Millet's eyes grew brighter as he raised his hands. So. At this moment, the wind blades inundated him like a machine gun. Klein only had enough time to dodge half of it before his body was torn apart, turning into thin and light shreds of paper that flew into the air. Klein appeared in another direction and continued to charge at Bishop Millet, trying to close the distance between them to an effective distance. After catching the sun brooch, Eland immediately felt the heat. He wished that he could take off his clothes and jump into freezing water. He thought for a moment about the words Gairman Sparrow had left him before taking out a tin-colored alcohol flask from the inside of his clothes, unscrewed the lid, and poured out all of the Lanty-proof inside. The strong aroma of the wine rapidly spread in all directions. Blazing Danitz looked around, feeling certain of the situation. With a grimace, he genuflected and suddenly pressed both his palms onto the ground. 2 scarlet fire serpents appeared out of thin air, clinging to the ground as they spread towards Azek's copper whistle and created 4 burning walls of fire. His original plan had been to throw a fireball at Bishop Millet and let Gehrman Sparrow use the flames to easily jump towards the bishop and launch an attack. However, after seeing that the area around the bishop was filled with freezing gales, he rationally gave up on the idea. He was prepared to first clean up the headless monsters to prevent them from disturbing Gehrman Sparrow's ability to use his true strength. Cleves, Cecile, Teague, and Harris had already stood up again and had drawn their guns. They surrounded Erdy, Donna, and Timothy in the middle, guarding them against any other monsters that might appear. Their experience taught them that, without any prior teamwork training, it was best not to interfere in a battle that was beyond that of ordinary humans. Tap! 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 The 6 headless men, oblivious to the burning flames, burst through the scarlet walls of fire and began to pounce onto Azek's copper whistle like ravenous dogs. This gave Elan time to inject his spirituality into the sun brooch with composure. After the holy water condensed, he dripped them into the alcohol flask. Seeing the headless people in a frenzied bunch, Danet's heart skipped a beat. He bent down halfway and, with a flushed face, condensed a scorching white flaming spear in his right palm. Taking a step forward, he twisted his waist and swung his arm, throwing out the flaming spear. It whistled as it hit a headless man and nailed it to the ground. A blazing white light soared, and the headless man's body was reduced to ashes. The remaining half of his body was also burning, continuously releasing blackish-green gases. Seeing that his attack had succeeded, Danitz was about to continue this attack method when he suddenly sensed a particular kind of crazy, terrifying hunger. At this moment, he felt as though he had arrived in front of a deep abyss, just one step short from falling in. He knew that Gehrman Sparrow was no longer suppressing the crazy soul inside him. After using paper figurine substitutes 3 times, Klein finally entered a predetermined distance. The glove on his left palm suddenly exploded with a hunger that had been suppressed for a long time, and dark golden scales began sprouting from it as it squirmed. Klein's pupils faded away, as if they had turned vertical. Immediately after, his pupils reflected Bishop Millet's fluttering dark blue robes. Without a sound, the middle-aged man who was about to produce a large number of wind blades suddenly tilted his head backwards, and his body froze for a second. His eyes, which were glowing with a dark red light, lost their rationality as they were filled with a sense of madness. His skin became smooth and colorful, like the skin of some aquatic creatures. He let out a panting sound, as though it had come from the depths of the ocean, as slippery, disgusting tentacles suddenly drilled out from under his dark blue robe. Psychiatrist's frenzy. Klein originally only wanted to use this to interrupt the enemy's attack in order to create an opportunity for him later, but after going berserk, Bishop Millet immediately lost control. The moment the fallen or corrupted man lost his final shackles of reasoning, he immediately stepped into the abyss of losing control. Klein's pupils shrank as he saw the situation. He no longer hesitated, and he switched the soul he was driving. In the midst of his frenzy, the glove on his left palm became stained with a gold color. His expression became dignified as his gaze once again locked onto Bishop Millet. In an instant, his eyes lit up like 2 bolts of lightning. All of a sudden, Bishop Millet let out a blood-curdling screech, his palms and tentacles retracted as he covered his head. His psyche had been penetrated, causing him indescribable pain. Interrogator. Klein pushed himself up with his right hand, and his left hand lit up with a resplendent brilliance. Right on the heels of that, he leaned back and opened his arms as if to embrace the sun. A thick, pure, and blazing brilliance descended from the sky, landing on Bishop Millet and enveloping him within it. The surroundings changed as though it was daytime. The strong gales came to an abrupt halt. Sequence 5 Priest of Light. Bishop Millet's body began to evaporate, first his skin, then his tentacles, and finally his flesh. By the time the brilliant pillar of light disappeared, he no longer looked human. Instead, he had turned into a monster made of bones and flesh. Whatever was left of his aura was rather weak. However, he wasn't dead. The vitality of a rampager was stronger than ever before. Klein's expression didn't change. He took a few steps forward and rushed to the battered body of Bishop Millet. He genuflected, leaned forward, and pressed his left palm against the flesh. He stopped using the power of the Priest of Light because he wanted to leave some food for creeping hunger. A small crack silently appeared in the palm region of the glove as 2 rows of illusory, white, and eerie teeth grew out from it as it madly devoured any flesh, bones, and spirituality. However, Bishop Millet continued struggling. He steadied his flesh and grew new tentacles, trying to entangle Klein and pull him into his embrace. Klein threw his cane, pulled out his revolver, and fired 5 shots in quick succession at the monster. Bang! 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 Bullets ranging from pale gold, brass, and silver colors struck Bishop Millet, igniting patches of different colored flames. Bishop Millet let out a blood-curdling screech once more, one that came from his soul. He finally wasn't able to resist creeping hunger. Even his flesh and soul were transformed into a torrent that poured into the insatiable mouth. In just 2 or 3 seconds, all that was left on the ground were clothes, money, and specks of dark blue and green light blobs. This was the difference between devouring and grazing. Klein wanted the latter more, but there was no other food around. Meanwhile, Captain Eland had already created 2 rounds of holy water inside his alcohol flask. Danitz hurriedly shouted at him, "Throw it over." Without hesitation, Eland threw the alcohol flask towards the headless men who were still vying for the copper whistle. Ahem. Danitz cleared his throat and stood up straight. He leisurely inserted his left palm into his pocket and pushed forward with his right hand, quickly forming many scarlet fire ravens around him. These half-illusionary fire ravens flapped their wings and flew out, following different trajectories of attack. At the same time, they collided with the alcohol flask which happened to be right on top of the group of headless people. Rumble. The alcohol flask shattered as sun-holy water splattered everywhere. Sizzle. The remaining headless people were all drenched as they screamed and twitched in pain before falling to the ground. They melted away quickly into blood as Azek's copper whistle lay still in the middle of the purified area. It's resolved. Gehrman Sparrow is really strong. Even if he encounters Captain, he'll have the ability to resist her. It's a pity that I didn't get to see what beyonder powers he had used. Danitz turned his head to look at Klein, who was standing in front of the remains of Bishop Millet, and silently sighed. Then he saw Gehrman Sparrow glance at him coldly. Subconsciously, Danitz dejectedly ran out and picked up Azek's copper whistle. Donna rubbed her bruised arm and saw Uncle Sparrow in his long black coat walking back a few steps before stooping to pick up his half-top hat, silently dust it off, and put it back on. Chapter 512, The End of Things. Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas Studios. After Klein retrieved his hat, Bishop Millet's beyonder characteristic had already been fully condensed. It was only the size of a thumb and was translucent and light blue in color. However, from time to time, green streaks would appear like a tidal wave that approached a black hue. Opening the revolver's cylinder, Klein shook it, dropping the empty shells that were either gold, silver, or brass in color to the ground, creating crisp tinkling sounds. Then, he calmly took out a speed loader he had prepared earlier and loaded other beyonder rounds bullet into the gun. After doing all this, he put away the revolver, bent over to pick up Bishop Millet's beyonder characteristic and stuffed it into his pocket without paying too much attention to it. Klein picked up his cane and turned back to the group after taking a few steps. He pulled out a paper figurine and flicked it like he was lashing a whip. Pa! The paper figurine was quickly ignited. It flew out of his hand and turned into specks of scarlet light that fell to the ground, extinguishing into dust. How cool! Denton forgot the pain from his fall and stared intently. It's like Uncle Sparrow is setting off fireworks. Donna nodded in agreement with her brother's words. After using paper figurine substitutes to interfere with the information traces in the area, Klein looked in the direction of the way back and said calmly and concisely, "Leave this area." With that, he turned around and walked away at a leisurely pace. He took the sun brooch and Azek's copper whistle from Eland and Danitz respectively. Erdi and the others didn't make useless comments, nor did they cry out in pain. They followed quietly behind. In the battle just now, they had fully witnessed the uniqueness of Beyonders, especially Danitz's flaming powers. It was the most eye-catching and obvious. It left them a deep impression, making them fully realize that this wasn't something ordinary people could intervene in. All they could do was abide by the instructions and follow closely behind. Only by doing so could they guarantee their survival. Compared to Danitz, the battle between Klein and Bishop Millet mainly involved invisible wind blades and the truly intangible psyche domain. Other than the holy light that seemed to descend from the gods and the frightening sight of Bishop Millet's loss of control, the entire battle seemed completely calm, so it didn't deliver a shock to the onlookers. As they passed by the area they had just been in, Cleves, Cecile, and the others suddenly stopped in their tracks. They saw the ground covered with dense cracks everywhere. They instantly understood one thing, and that was that Gehrman Sparrow's battle with the fallen bishop was many times more harrowing than the other performance. A sense of horror and security arose at the same time as all of them quickened their pace. 20 or 30 seconds later, Klein stopped on the street outside the telegraph office. He said to Captain Eland in a deadpan manner, "Do you want to send a telegram?" After saying that, he couldn't help but remind him, "Do not force your way in." All right. On this strange night, Eland was just as cautious. He took a few brisk steps to the telegraph office and knocked on the door 3 times. Thump. 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 Amidst a slightly muffled sound, someone from inside asked, "Who is it?" Klein, who was already on guard, suddenly frowned, because the one who spoke was a man. Eland was also puzzled. "I want to send a telegram." "Who are you?" "I remember the person on duty was a lady before." The man inside replied calmly, "I'm Pavo Court, Melanie's colleague. She's right, next to me. She's fine." Just as Pavo Court finished speaking, the female voice from before immediately followed up, "Yes. I'm doing very well. You don't need to take note anymore. Pavo Court is back. Pal, doesn't your folklore say not to answer or open the door? How did Pavo Court get in?" Klein resisted the urge to question her. Eland took a step back and cleared his throat. "I'd like to send a telegram to the headquarters of the Church of Storms." "I'm sorry. But, we can't open the door," Pavo Court replied without emotion. Eland also felt the strangeness of the matter and didn't dare to force it. Instead, he proposed an alternative plan. "Can you send it for me and pass the draft to me through the crack in the door? The content is about the abnormal changes in Bansi Harbor, and the death of Bishop Millet and Priest Jace. It shall be signed off with Eland." "All right." Melanie's voice trailed off, as if she'd returned to the telegraph machine. After waiting for a while, he heard tapping sounds, and before long, a copy of the telegram draft was extended out from the gap under the door. Eland bent down to pick it up, resisting the urge to peek through the cracks. He looked at the telegram draft, and his nose suddenly twitched. He smelled a faint scent of blood on the paper. He tilted his head and looked at Gehrman Sparrow, using his eyes to inform him that there was a problem with the telegraph office. However, he was met with a deep and unperturbed gaze, as well as words that were said in a calm and indifferent tone. "Return to the ship." After throwing this sentence out, Klein turned around immediately and walked towards the end of the street, his figure gradually blending into the thin fog. Carrying a broken lantern, Danitz immediately followed after him. Without any hesitation, Donna and the others did the same. After pondering in silence for 2 seconds, Eland took the telegram draft and ran after the group. No other sounds came out from the telegraph office anymore. It was unusually quiet. Perhaps due to the extermination of the fallen Bishop Millet, Klein and the others didn't meet any more headless people in black cloaks on their way back. Moldy heads were only seen twice, and they were easily dealt with. After walking for an unknown length of time, they finally saw the dock and the white agate which had candlelight seeping out. This sight made Erdi and the others regain their strength. They transitioned from a brisk walk to a jog, all the way until they reached the bottom of the gangway. Klein stood guard below them with his blood-stained cane until everyone was on board, then with a tug, he jumped and arrived on the deck with just a few steps. At that moment, Eland had already begun to gather his first mate, second mate, bosun, gunner commander, and other subordinates. He got them to gather the sailors, adjust the cannons, and prepare to depart at any moment. Although leaving the port at night had non-trivial security risks, it would be the best way to avoid danger if the situation worsened. Uncle Sparrow, Donna held her brother by the hand and trotted to Klein's side, plagued by a bellyful of questions. Klein nodded, pointed to the cabin, and said, "Go back to your room first. We'll talk about it tomorrow. The danger hasn't been averted." Donna nodded obediently. Together with Denton, she put her index finger to her lips. "Shoo." After the Branch family and the Timothy family entered the cabin, Klein walked over to Eland, took out Bishop Millet's Beyonder characteristic, and threw it to him. "If there are still mandated punishers alive, return this to them." The Beyonder characteristic left behind by a bishop who might have been a Sequence 6 would definitely be pursued by the Church of Storms, and everyone on the White Agate would be a target of suspicion. Klein didn't want to be wanted by the number one power at sea as soon as he set sail. If none of the mandated punishers in Bansi Harbor survived, and if reinforcements from headquarters would take a while to arrive, leaving Klein plenty of time to deal with the matter and leave, then he would surely be reluctant to return it and would find a reason to get it back. Eland caught the thumb-sized object, glancing at it doubtfully. He didn't ask what it could be used for, and he chuckled. "Don't worry about the Church of Storms investigation. I'll hint to them that you're with me. So, I'll be considered a member of MI9 by the Church of Storms?" Klein nodded without saying anything else. Eland looked at Danitz and probingly asked, "Blazing?" "Ha." Danitz chuckled dryly and took a leaf out of someone's book. "Guess." "I don't think so then," Eland replied with tacit understanding. With the simple matters dealt with, Klein returned to the side of the ship and looked at the fog-shrouded Bansi Harbor, prepared against any hidden dangers. Time ticked by, and the peak of the mountain next to the shore lit up once again with the lights of a thunderstorm. Streaks of silver and violent bolts of lightning swept the area without restraint before they gradually calmed down. The fog in Bansi Harbor began to dissipate, and the light of the crimson moon became clearer. "It's over." Even after seeing this, Klein still didn't dare to completely relax. Half an hour later, 3 men who claimed to be mandated punishers came to the dock to see Captain Eland. After Gehrman Sparrow confirmed it with a divination and a round of questioning, Eland allowed the sailors to lower the gangway. The 3 mandated punishers motioned for the surrounding crew to leave, then they lowered their voices and informed the captain of the situation. Klein didn't move closer to listen, but instead he waited patiently for the matter to end. A few minutes later, Eland returned Bishop Millet's remaining characteristic to the mandated punishers and watched them leave the White Agate to deal with the rest of the mess. "Phew." Eland exhaled and came to Klein's and Danitz's side. He casually said with a tinge of lingering fear, "The matter has been resolved. There aren't any problems." "Has it really been solved?" Klein suddenly thought of Pavo Court and Melanie behind the telegraph office door. He recalled Fox, the owner of the Green Lemon restaurant, and the many lodgers who had watched them silently. Eland continued, "To be specific, Jace discovered the revival of ancient customs, cannibalism and live sacrifice, confirming that a small number of people in Bansi Harbor had become heretics. He hurried back to the church and reported this to Bishop Millet, but unbeknownst to him, the person before him was the leader of the heretics, a true fallen one. He had his neck cut off by Millet's wind blade and died in the Cathedral of the Lord. Millet was about to dispose of the body, but he was discovered by the servants, hence, things spiraled out of control. Some of the servants were turned into monsters, while some were led by the priests to hide underground. Without any means to hide himself, Millet quickly left the cathedral, gathered the heretics, and headed for the altar at the mountaintop. The weather changed as a result. After the mandated punishers retrieved 3 sealed artifacts, they rushed over and engaged in an intense battle. In the process, Millet was injured and escaped, while the rest of the heretics remained to defend the altar, which was eventually overrun. The church's headquarters has already replied, and they'll be sending people to investigate the cause of Bishop Millet's fall. I told them that we were only able to kill Bishop Millet by joining forces because he was heavily injured. By the way, the mandated punishers have gotten me to get the Branch and Timothy families to sign a confidential agreement. After giving a general account of the situation, Eland let out a long sigh of relief and busied himself with the remaining matters. Klein didn't dare to completely relax. He stayed on deck until the clouds appeared to burn when the sun slowly rose, illuminating the entire port. He saw the residents leave their houses one by one, basking in the golden sunlight, chatting and laughing as they headed for their respective jobs. Bansi Harbor finally had the breath of human life again. It's really over. Klein turned around, slightly puzzled. He had planned to catch up on his sleep, but only after the ship had departed. As for Danitz, although he had long been yawning, he remained motionless when he saw Gehrman Sparrow being motionless. On the way into the cabin, Klein met Eland, who had also not slept the entire night. "Good morning. We're about to leave the port." "There's nothing to worry about," Eland greeted with a smile. As he spoke, the white agate's whistle sounded. Upon hearing the sound, Klein secretly exhaled, deciding to put all his doubts behind him. He didn't want to think about Bansi Harbor anymore, so he nodded in response. Eland stretched his neck and commented with a sigh, "Last night, I had a mystical feeling that the old Binzi and the modern Bansi Harbor overlapped." Klein had intended to walk past him when he suddenly grasped a word and asked with a grave expression, "Binzi?" That's the ancient name of Bansi Harbor. 300 or 400 years ago, it was called Binzi Town. Later, due to its pronunciation and other factors, it gradually evolved into Bansi, Eland introduced in passing. Klein's pupils shrank when he heard the answer. He remembered very clearly that the evil spirit in Backlund's underground relic had once mentioned that if one wanted to find one of the founders of Rose Redemption, the former king of angels, Medici, and his descendants, one could go to Binzi Town to try their luck. Binzi. Klein's heart seemed to freeze over, inch by inch. A chill radiated from the depths of his bone marrow. He jerked his gaze back to the harbor, to the scenes of the telegraph office with its tightly closed doors and the lodgers in Green Lemon Restaurant who were silently staring at him. Chapter 513, Intimidation Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas Studios. If I had probed deeper, then there might be a high probability that I would have attracted the Rose Redemption or even a hidden red angel. There were several times where I danced at the edge of a cliff. Luckily, I managed to restrain my impulse and curiosity about the weird situation at Green Lemon Restaurant and the telegraph office. Klein retracted his gaze, finding the sun brooch inadequate in keeping his back from oozing with a layer of cold sweat. Compared to the arrival of the true creator, this unknown and undetonated situation was much more horrifying. At least, Klein couldn't help but imagine what would have happened if he kicked the telegraph office's door open, or if he went around to the back, flipped the window, and entered the room. He constantly imagined all sorts of strange and terrifying scenes, which frightened himself quite a bit. At the same time, he decided to produce sun-holy water for the passengers who had eaten at Bansi Harbor last night, in order to avoid any remaining dormant dangers. "What's wrong?" Eland sensed Gehrman Sparrow's abnormality. "I just remembered something." Klein used his clown's powers to keep his facial expression normal, but inside he was glad that he didn't take the risk last night and had now successfully left Bansi Harbor. As for the secrets of Rose Redemption and the King of Angels, he only had one thought in mind: quickly report it. If he didn't report it, was he allowing them to usher in 1351's new year? If he chose to hide the truth and wait until he had a sufficiently high sequence or enough strength to explore and reap the corresponding benefits, then Klein felt that he would feel very guilty and end up carrying a heavy burden if something happened during that time, causing the danger to be triggered prematurely, or if the remnant heretics would cause the death of one innocent passenger after another. That would only push him closer to losing control. Of course, reporting the matter needed to be done in a correct and astute manner. Klein wasn't foolish enough to tell Elan directly or write an anonymous letter to the Church of Storms, which would then lead to a lot of trouble. First, the authorities would definitely investigate Gehrman Sparrow's background, and things could be easily exposed if thorough investigations were made. Secondly, this identity might be exposed to the Rose Redemption, which might attract a King of Angels' pursuit. What Klein intended to do was to use the world to mention the anomaly in Bansi Harbor when the tarot gathering was held in 2 days. He would then have the fool to lightly allude to Rose Redemption and a King of Angels. As a member of the Church of Storms, the hanged man would naturally know what to do next. This would be a chance for him to perform a deed of merit. As for the blood of the direct descendants of the Medici family, Klein didn't even consider it, because neither he nor Miss Sharon had the intention of rescuing the evil spirit in the underground relic. Noticing that Gehrman Sparrow obviously didn't want to mention his past, Elan chuckled, took out a small black wooden box, and tossed it over. Klein reached out and caught it, using his eyes to express his puzzlement. The bladder of the Murloc. It can be used to make items. It's very useful at sea. The beyonder ingredient of a Murloc. Worth more than 150 pounds. The captain sure is generous. Klein had almost forgotten how Gehrman Sparrow should react. Fortunately, he had a lot of experience in acting. He immediately sank his face and said, "I didn't save you for a reward." Eland laughed and said, "I'm not giving you this in return for saving me. Aren't we friends now? Isn't it normal to help a friend make up for his shortcomings when he doesn't have such items?" What he said makes sense. There's no way to refute him at all. Klein held on to the small black box and remained silent for a few seconds. Finally, he nodded. Eland covered his mouth as he yawned before taking off his boat-shaped hat. "I need to return to my room to catch up on my sleep. See you at noon." Klein waved politely and led Danitz towards room 312. He saw that Donna and Denton were up early and waiting at the door. "Uncle Sparrow, what's that in your hand?" Donna asked curiously. Klein didn't say anything and directly opened the lid of the small black box. The interior was lined with a layer of black velvet, and sitting in the middle was a round, gem-like, transparent object. It had a blue, aqueous luster that swirled outwards. That day, the Murlocs. Denton thought for a moment. Bladder. At this moment, at Klein's signal, Danitz opened the door. Donna walked in briskly while stretching out her hand from behind her. She held a thick wad of cash that were a mix of 10-pound and 5-pound notes. "My father, my mother, Uncle Clevy's, and Uncle Timothy's family asked me to pass this to you. A total of 150 pounds. Donna smiled sweetly. "They said that this isn't enough to express their gratitude, it's just to replenish the supplies you used. Those things are expensive, right?" "Still all right." Klein thought for a moment, then he accepted the 150-pound gratuity so that Erdy and other ordinary people wouldn't feel uneasy. Seeing Uncle Gehrman Sparrow put the cash and the small black wooden box into his pocket, Donna was relieved that she had finally completed the task her parents had handed her. She quickly got into character and found her true intention for visiting. She asked curiously and fearfully, "Uncle Sparrow, what kind of monsters were those last night? Are ghost stories true? Were you born with the ability to jump out of the flames and let light descend? Is this magic, or witchcraft?" "Stop, stop, stop, you have too many questions." Klein, who couldn't stand the heat any longer, took off the sun brooch and threw it on the desk in the living room. He casually replied at the same time. They're called beyonder powers, those that are obtained through certain rituals and potions. A lot of ghost stories have archetypes, and last night's monsters were created by an evil ritual. Ask him about the rest. Klein glanced sideways at Danitz. How magical, Denton and Donna sighed. Then Donna said, her eyes shining, Uncle Sparrow, you're just like the Superman described by Emperor Roselle. Can we also become people like you through rituals and potions? Denton nodded heavily, echoing his sister's words, and both of them felt a surge of strong anticipation. At that moment, Donna noticed Gehrman Sparrow's eyes turn melancholic. Soon after, she saw the mouth of this magical uncle open up, revealing a somewhat strange smile. Klein said in a low voice, this isn't something to be envied or anticipated. As long as you choose this path, you'll constantly be accompanied by threats and madness. You can beat them 100 times, 1,000 times, but as long as you lose once, you'll end up like that fallen bishop. As he spoke, he leaned on his cane, took off his suit, and rolled up the sleeves of his shirt. One of his arms was shriveled and wrinkled, as though he were a centenarian. The other was translucent and colorless, with a direct view of the blood vessels, muscles, and aponeurosis beneath the skin. At the same time, his face grew dense pale flesh granules that made Donna and Denton fall backward in terror and slam into the door. With thin flesh granules growing on his face, Klein maintained his smile. See this? This is madness. No. Donna and Denton almost lost their minds, stumbled through the door, and ran out. After a few steps, they fell to the ground, unable to keep their balance. How terrifying, Denton kept crying in a low voice. At that moment, they heard the door to room 312 clang shut. Donna gradually calmed down, not daring to think of Gehrman Sparrow's appearance again. The way Uncle Sparrow looked, the flesh granules had occupied every inch of his face. The way his arms were shriveled and translucent wasn't much better than the monsters of the night before. For some reason, she recalled his eyes and the words, "This is madness." Her vision suddenly blurred, and she couldn't stop the tears from rolling down her cheeks. Donna, what's the matter with you?" Denton was so frightened by her reaction that he forgot his fear. Donna sobbed and said, "I don't know. I just feel very, very sad all of a sudden." Inside room 312. Seeing that Klein had returned to normal, Danitz couldn't help but click his tongue. Actually, there's no need to scare the children like this. They'll have nightmares. Just tell them that taking potions is dangerous. Just as he finished his sentence, he saw a hard wooden cane covered in blood and dirt flying over, accompanied by a sentence that wasn't in the least bit emotional. "Wash it clean." Danitz reached out to grab the cane as the smile on his face froze. Backlund, Empress Borough, inside the Hall family's luxurious mansion. Audrey stood behind the white and gold railings on the second floor, watching the servants on the first floor come and go, bustling with activity. According to the customs of the Lone Kingdom, the nobles with fiefs would leave Backlund 1 week after the New Year ball, and they would return to their own fiefs, where they would enjoy a pleasant life in the countryside or in a castle. In June, they would return to the capital, where they would socialize day after day. Of course, a banker with actual power and wealth like Earl Hall definitely needed to make trips between the two places to handle many matters. However, moving wasn't an easy task. Many things had to be tidied up beforehand, and some of the servants would bring them back to the manor or castle. Only after everything was ready would the masters begin their journey. After this tarot gathering ends, I should be sitting in a steam train back to Eastchester County. I hope that vampire gentleman really can get the fruit of the Tree of Elders and the blood of the Mirror Dragon so that I can become a psychiatrist before I leave Backlund. Audrey allowed her thoughts to wander. Just then, Lady Caitlin came over and asked with a smile, "Penny, for your thoughts." "Well, you're already an adult. When you get back to Backlund in June, you'll be able to find something to do. Do you have any plans?" Audrey didn't think further and directly replied, "Mother, I want to join the church's charity organizations. I want to get to know this world," she added silently in her heart. "Good idea," the Countess agreed. After giving her some advice, she walked down to the second floor and began to inspect the affairs of the family. Audrey withdrew her emotions and turned her head to the side. With a faint smile, she said to the large golden retriever that was sitting to her side, "Susie, are you looking forward to it? You can run as much as you want in the green pastures and in the lush woods." She was making fun of Susie because she had only become a gift because she wasn't a qualified foxhound. Susie instinctively wanted to stick her tongue out, but she stopped herself like a cultured lady. She answered without hiding her emotions, "Of course, I like to run, but I hate those barbaric fellows." "Are you referring to the foxhounds that father and the others rear?" Audrey pursed her lips to stop herself from smiling. She looked up at the wall clock and saw that it was almost time for the tarot gathering. Chapter 514, Legends of Ancient Gods Translator, Atlas Studios Editor. Atlas Studios. Above the endless gray fog, the majestic palace stood still. Just as Emlyn White, who had arrived here once again, regained his vision, he saw Miss Justice opposite him looking at the end of the mottled long table before greeting cheerfully, "Good afternoon, Mr. Fool." Audrey greeted everyone, one person at a time, starting with the Fool and ending with the world. This order wasn't according to the seating arrangement, but by the order of the tarot cards. The Fool was the beginning that contained all possibilities, and the world was the end that represented perfect sublimation. This was a little obsessive-compulsive disorder on Miss Audrey's part, a mysticism enthusiast. It started to appear with the increasing number of tarot club members. She really is a carefree girl of stately birth. Emlyn deliberately passed a deep judgment and politely responded to the greeting. During this process, he caught sight of the sun through the corner of his eye. He couldn't help but think of the recent days when he had been studying the detailed history of the Sanguine at the home of Baron Waymandy. There are a lot of details that I don't know about. There are indeed differences between professional researchers and amateur enthusiasts, but from this week onwards, I, Emlyn White, would be a professional researcher. Baron Waymandy has never mentioned anything related to the City of Silver, so I can't ask him directly. As the secret messiah of the Sanguine who is burdened with secrets, I have to be careful in such matters. Attending class for half a day and going to the cathedral for half a day before accompanying the dolls at night seems to be a pretty good life. Emlyn's thoughts gradually dispersed. Suddenly, he frowned and realized a very important question. Why do I still go to the Harvest Church every day? Yes, as a noble Sanguine, I must put an end to the things I start. There have been a lot of patients recently. Sigh, having your reputation spread isn't a good thing. Emlyn's brow gradually relaxed into a softer frown. He saw that Miss Justice had completed her greetings. He raised his hand to knock on the table and looked at her. "The things you need." Audrey pressed her right hand down and made a gesture to stop him before saying with a faint smile, "We'll talk about this during the transaction period. This is Mr. Fool's reading time." Based on Mr. Vampire's tone, there must be at least one of the fruits of the Tree of Elders and the blood of a mirror dragon. "Audrey, you're going to be a psychiatrist soon. You're about to become a mid-sequence beyonder." Audrey's mood became increasingly cheerful, the corners of her eyes filled with smiles. She looked towards the figure amidst the thick fog and said with an uplifted tone towards the end, "Honorable Mr. Fool, I've gotten another 3 Roselle diary pages, just short of 4 pages. She pursed her lips while in thought. With Miss Justice setting an example, Furs also said, "Mr. Fool, I also have 3 new pages of Roselle's diary." She was also full of anticipation for this tarot gathering because her second apprentice potion had been digested much faster than expected. The dormant dangers had already been completely eliminated the day before yesterday. Derek followed immediately, "Honorable Mr. Fool, I've copied some legends of ancient gods." Then, he said to the hanged man, "I've also tabulated the list of monsters around the area." He really is a good child who doesn't need anyone to remind him. Klein, who had a rich harvest, sighed with emotion. Seriously, he hasn't improved at all. Even though this will lower the difficulty of me obtaining benefits, it also conceals the risk of me losing the resources from the City of Silver. Exposure is a problem that requires constant vigilance. Alger shook his head indiscernibly. Roselle's diary and the legend of the ancient gods soon appeared in the palm of Klein's hand. He skimmed through it quickly and found that 2 of the 6 pages in the diary were repetitions of the past. For example, one of Miss Justice's contributed pages matched a page which the hanged man had handed over last year. That's inevitable unless I can really teach them simplified Chinese. Klein sighed and willed the 2 diary pages to the back. The remaining 4 pages didn't contain very valuable information. Most of them belonged to the period when Roselle had lost his ideals and was obsessed with money, and the text was filled with sentences such as, "What did I invent today? What will I invent tomorrow? How many gold coins can it be sold for? Or, how much investment I received?" It nearly made Klein lose control of his expression, wishing to smack these diary pages in Roselle's face. At this moment, Audrey keenly discovered that the Dark Emperor card had returned to the side of Mr. Fool's hand and was placed face down. So it really was bestowed to his adorer. Was it to help him complete a mission? Or is there another possibility, that this is a new card of blasphemy, and not the original one? Audrey guessed with interest. After flipping through the diary pages, Klein resisted the urge to take a deep breath to calm his heart, and he looked at the legends of the ancient god provided by Little Sunday. It was quite a rough description. It divided the 8 ancient gods of the Second Epoch into 3 camps. The giant king, Ormur, the elf king, Sanaithrim, and the vampire ancestor, Lilith, were allies who fought against the dragon of imagination, Ankwelt, the phoenix ancestor, Gregrace, and the mutated king, Kvaster. As for the devil monarch, Farbody, and the annihilation demonic wolf, Flegria, they were the ones who wanted to subvert all order and corrupt all living beings. In the records of the City of Silver, the 8 ancient gods were described as violent, evil, cruel, and terrifying. Even the ancestor vampire, Lilith, who superficially looked the most normal and was described as the embodiment of beauty, had a disgusting and ferocious side. For instance, she would manifest into a mountain range of flesh. On top of it grew all kinds of reproductive organs as they spewed out thick black fog while constantly producing all sorts of strange creatures. All powerhouses who approached her would be overwhelmed by the desire to mate and reproduce, becoming a walking organ. And all living beings who saw this scene, other than the other ancient gods, would lose their minds without exception or mutate on the spot, while others became crazy. The records of the City of Silver originated from the ancient texts of the giant king's court. Of course, that was what they claimed. I cannot eliminate the possibility that this is to discredit an ally. This aspect is rather similar to the loss of control of the primordial moon who the sanguine pray to. Is this one of the traits when one follows the moon pathway to the end? At this thought, Klein almost raised his head to sweep his glance at Emlyn White. In the legends of the City of Silver, the vampire ancestor, Lilith, really did control the crimson moon. As long as she wanted, she could make the blood moon appear every day for 365 days a year, allowing the negative energy to rampage through the lands and the spirit world to interact with reality for an extended period of time, releasing countless unspeakable monsters and evil spirits. This is the power of a deity. I wonder what the difference is between the ancient gods and the current true gods. Why do all of them look like evil gods? In the legends of the Sanguine, Lilith isn't like that. One of them is lying between the 2 of them. Or could it be that there was a change midway, from the one recorded in the City of Silver to the one depicted in the legends of the Sanguine? Klein looked away and took note of the details. He made the paper in his hands vanish and leaned back slightly. You may begin. With her bright eyes, Audrey looked at Emlyn White and immediately said, Mr. Moon, do you have news of the fruit of the tree of elders and the blood of a mirror dragon? Emlyn nodded his chin and said, a total of 750 pounds. Just pay this amount and they'll be yours. And of course, there's my payment. £100. Audrey didn't bother with the total price at all and happily responded, "Deal. I hope that the deal will be completed today or tomorrow." "No problem." Emlyn, who was about to make £100, couldn't refuse Miss Justice's request. "Awesome." Audrey lowered her right hand, clenched it into a fist, and lightly pumped it twice. At that moment, Alger turned his head to look at Mr. Vampire. "Do you still want the inheritance of that sanguine baron?" £4,500, that's the best price I managed to get for you." In fact, the pirate was willing to give it up for £3,200. Emlyn's expression twisted. "If it's only £1,000, then I'll definitely take it, but," he replied inwardly. Although their family members were pretty good apothecaries and doctors, with a modest annual income and long lives that allowed them to save a fortune, Emlyn had been unable to save any money since he became infatuated with dolls. From time to time, he would order some custom dolls. Even if the £100 which he hadn't received yet was counted, his personal savings didn't even reach £500, of which £150 had been contributed by Detective Sherlock Moriarty. "I'll think about it again," Emlyn said with difficulty, suddenly feeling that he had to find some way to quickly save up money. This fellow, Emlyn, just made the sound of poverty. Upon seeing this scene, Klein happily quipped inwardly. Being friends with Mr. Vampire in reality, Klein had heard him mention that over the years, he had spent more than £7,000 on dolls, which made Klein marvel at the price of puppets and how extravagant Emlyn was. "No problem." The hanged man didn't press further. He turned to Audrey. "My fair lady, the artisan has completed the work and has obtained a rather mystical item. It allows you to truly change your appearance while also providing you with 3 Beyonder powers: flame controlling, damage transfer, and danger intuition. It improves your balance and agility. It's a silver mask, but it can also be a hat or an earring, it can change its appearance, and you can name it. Of course, it also has its own minor flaws. When you wear it, your emotions will be amplified, and you must learn how to control yourself. It costs £5,500. At this point, the hanged man chuckled and said to the world, "The Beyonder characteristic you provided earns you £4,500, and the artisan's workmanship is worth £1,000. £4,500, much better than I had expected, even though there's a 15% commission, that is to say, £675 for Mr. Hanged Man." Klein immediately controlled the world and nodded in agreement, that wouldn't be an issue. Emotions would be amplified. According to Miss Escalante, I'll have the ability to influence the moods and mental states of other people when I advance to psychiatrist. I should be able to do the same for myself. Yes, that flaw isn't a problem. Audrey nodded lightly. I will pay within 2 days of receiving the mystical item. In order to not reveal the secret of the Tarot Club, she had to wait until she had received the item before she could claim reimbursement from her father. Sure. The hanged man wasn't the least bit worried about Miss Justice's credibility. So rich. Both Emlyn and Furs felt agitated at the same time. Phew. Klein breathed a quiet sigh of relief. This meant that more than £3,000 of his would be available soon. Thank you, Miss Justice. He silently drew a crimson moon inwardly. Chapter 515, Harvests for Everyone. Translator, Atlas Studios. Editor, Atlas Studios. Frankly speaking, although Alger had predicted that Miss Justice wouldn't bargain, and the fact that the mystical item was indeed worth about £5,500, he still felt a strong sense of discomfort over such actions. It felt like after all the hard work he had put in to make a killing, the money he earned wasn't even more than her pocket money. £675 split from the world, and the artisan's fee is only £600. I'll earn a net profit of £400. I've made a total of £1,075 in this transaction, but the world isn't a simple figure. He has a great deal of Beyonder characteristics and potion formulas, and he's involved in a great number of events. He's in the know of relatively important information. It's not worth it to get into a conflict with him over a few £100. Otherwise, I could have pushed the price of his Beyonder characteristic to below £4,000. The hanged man thought wistfully. As the fool rejoiced at the prospect of receiving £3,825, Derek looked at the lady across him and earnestly said, "Miss Magician, your spirit-eater's stomach pouch is ready." "Excellent." Furs heaved a sigh of relief. "I'll pay £300 in cash to Mr. Hanged Man." Upon hearing this, Alger's spirit was also lifted. He hurriedly requested the fool sitting at the end of the long bronze table for permission to conjure the potion formula. A few seconds later, he wrote the Solar High Priest formula onto the yellowish-brown goatskin parchment in front of him. Sequence 7. Solar High Priest. Main ingredients: 1 comb of a dawn rooster, 1 fruit of a radiant spirit-packed tree. Supplementary ingredients: 100 milliliters of a dawn rooster, 10 drops of sun essential oil, 8 grams of fingered citron powder, and 5 grams of solidified lava. Although Klein didn't deliberately pry into this potion formula, the content which was conjured thanks to him was still reflected in his mind. As long as he was willing to use dream divination to recall, he would immediately get the corresponding knowledge. He couldn't help but exclaim, "Indeed, being a platform is most profitable." Derek received the piece of parchment expectantly, glancing at it with relief and excitement. Then, he conjured the list of monsters which were found in the area surrounding the City of Silver, letting the hanged man pick out the Beyonder ingredients that would be used to level the difference in prices. Alger calmly and carefully checked the list, gaining a precise understanding of the situation around the City of Silver. After that, he selected 3 ingredients that he knew had buyers and prices. "After that, I'll be able to sell them within 2 days, earning me about £1,000. Counting the £300 from Miss Magician and the previous £1,075, I'll finally have enough money for the dragon-eyed sea condor's eyeballs." Feeling exhausted, Alger turned his head to the side and said to Furs, "Miss Magician, you can prepare the transaction for the dragon-eyed sea condor eyeballs." The hanged man had less than £20 on him at present, and even the artisan fees he had paid in advance was borrowed thanks to his wide network of contacts. However, by the end of the transaction, his cash assets would reach £2,375, sufficient enough to cover the £2,000 required for the main ingredient. Furs thought of the loss she had suffered last week at the hands of Mr. Hanged Man and responded, feeling slight grievance, "All right." For her, how much this deal would eventually earn her would depend on her teacher, Dorian Gray. She wouldn't earn anything extra beyond what he was willing to share with her. At the end of the transaction segment, Klein manipulated the world to seek to purchase the remnant spirituality of ancient wraiths and a pair of eyes from a 6-winged gargoyle. As for the sale or process of making the Murloc bladder into a mystical item, he temporarily didn't intend to do it through the Tarot Club. He wished to use it as a catalyst to expand his social connections and resource channels at sea. After today's tarot gathering, Miss Justice will finish gathering her psychiatrist potion's ingredients, and the same is true for Miss Magician's Trickmaster potion. Now that little son has the formula, he can finally work towards Sequence 7. He's one step closer to providing me with a way to remove the mental corruption inside a Beyonder characteristic. Mr. Hanged Man is about to receive one of the main ingredients of Wind Blessed, so there's only one last obstacle in his way before reaching Sequence 6. Only Emlyn hasn't yet made up his mind or found a solution. There's no hope of him advancing in the near future. Klein looked around and said with a chuckle, "Continue your free exchange." Audrey was about to say something out of habit, but when she thought about it carefully, she felt that there was no news to share this week. Apart from the numerous balls I've attended and the 2 psychology classes, there are only matters regarding my return to Eastchester County that can be talked about, but there's no need to. She pursed her lips and remained silent. Furs, who was still in her languid state from the New Year's holidays, continued having a blank mind. She commented, feeling rather guiltily, "Backlund is still under the same kind of high pressure as before. Don't take any risks unless you're an official Beyonder." "Is that so?" Emlyn, who had been behaving well during this time, frowned doubtfully. A vampire like him who led a routine lifestyle couldn't experience the pain of having all the Beyonder gatherings stopped. The hanged man nodded and thought for a while. Then, he said to the son, "Don't be careless. Before holding a sacrificial ritual, it's best if you confirm that the chief who led the exploratory team isn't in the City of Silver, or if he's busy with other matters." "Mr. Hanged Man, do you mean that the chief could have noticed the repeated cycle of fate?" Derek asked in astonishment. The hanged man replied solemnly, "That possibility can't be ruled out. However, I can't be sure since I don't know enough about your City of Silver." Having said that, he hid his smile and presented a serious expression. Derek said with chagrin, "There are many things I'm not sure of either." Alger sighed inwardly, eliminating his disappointed emotions. "In short, caution and carefulness will allow you to live longer." "Thank you for your reminder," the son said sincerely. The hanged man withdrew his gaze and said with a smile, "Recently, the sea has been relatively calm." "No, that's just what you think." Klein silently retorted, manipulating the world to speak with a hoarse voice, "I just happened to hear about something at sea." Without waiting for the hanged man to ask, he looked at Justice and the magician. "Ladies, can you buy me a radio transceiver?" "I can give it a try." Furs agreed without paying too much attention. As she was about to leave Backlund, Audrey could only say, "Sorry." After negotiating this deal, the world cleared his throat and said, "That matter has something to do with the Church of Storms." "Something to do with the church? Why didn't I receive any notice? Is it not required for them to pass it down to people at my level?" The hanged man frowned and waited patiently for the world to speak in detail. The world originally wanted to sweep the hanged man with a teasing look, but due to the difficulty of those sequence of actions, he could only regretfully give up. With a heavy and hoarse laugh, he said, "An old custom in Bansi Harbor was revived. Some of the inhabitants became heretics, and even a bishop of the Church of Storms was corrupted. I heard that the matter has been resolved, but quite a few people died." Bansi Harbor. Alger recalled the situation of the area and explained to Miss Justice and the others who remained confused, "There's a custom of living sacrifices there, and the target is an evil spirit called the God of Weather. Overseas, in the southern continent, there are quite a number of such evil spirits. On the surface, it seems like they've been cleared away, but in reality, they continue living in a strange state. Many people have suddenly died in those places. Heh, it isn't necessarily because of an illness. If you guys have similar travel or adventure plans, don't be careless." Alger tried to describe what had happened in Bansi Harbor as an accident, one that was within the realm of understanding. Suddenly, he heard rather deep laughter. This laughter came from the end of the mottled long table. "Mr. Fool." The hanged man suddenly turned his head. "Mr. Fool. Bansi Harbor isn't as simple as it seems." Audrey immediately looked at Mr. Fool who was sitting upright on his high-backed chair. Noticing looks of puzzlement, curiosity, or excitement, Klein laughed leisurely with a hint of reminiscence in his voice. "This reminds me of a king of angels." "A king of angels?" "The matter of Bansi Harbor involves a king of angels." Audrey's eyes widened in anticipation of what Mr. Fool was to say next. "A king of angels." Furs took a deep breath, her expression somewhat bitter. "Why is it that all we talk about at the Tarot Club is the descent of the true creator, the awakening of the primordial demoness, and the reappearance of a king of angels? I'm only a sequence 9. She wanted to look up at the sky and sigh. Emlyn, on the other hand, felt a baffling sense of excitement, having found another reason for why his ancestor had gotten him to pray to the Fool. As expected, this is a gathering of messiahs in preparation for the apocalypse. We are the chosen ones who will gradually face evil existences such as the King of Angels, the primordial demoness, the true creator, and so on. Emlyn had an impulse to immediately agree to the deal proposed by the hanged man, but the fact that he had no money had ruthlessly crushed the fantasy in his mind. "Which King of Angels will it be?" In a rare occasion, Derek joined in with the conversation with Miss Justice and the rest. A king of angels. What secret is Bansi Harbor hiding? Alger was waiting for the answer with rapt attention. Seeing that Mr. Fool didn't plan on continuing, Audrey couldn't help but ask, "Honorable Mr. Fool, which king of angels is it?" Klein leaned back in his chair, chuckled and said, "Medici, who established the Rose Redemption. His descendants live in Binzi." Rose Redemption. The king of angels related to the true creator? Audrey didn't expect that the matter would be multi-layered, with each layer more serious than the last. She subconsciously asked, "Binzi?" "That's the old name of Bansi," Alger replied in a low voice as he clenched his hands. He could no longer imagine the truth behind this matter. He only knew that the unforeseen event in Bansi Harbor might not be over yet. The danger that could devour people remained lurking in the shadows. He didn't know much about the phrase Rose Redemption, only knowing that it had something to do with the temple of the true creator and the angel of fate, Ouroboros, but was unable to confirm exactly what it represented. In short, the level of this matter is beyond my imagination. Alger looked at the end of the long, model table, and suddenly the thought flashed through his mind that Mr. Fool really did know the 8 kings of angels and that he knew many secrets. At that moment, he thought of something. Just last week at the gathering, Miss Justice had inquired about the other kings of angels, and Mr. Fool's answer was that we will come into contact with them in the future. And just a week later, we really have come into contact with a new king of angels. Mr. Fool had foreseen this. Alger's pupils shrank as he lowered his gaze in fear. Chapter 5:16, The Hanged Man's Guest Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas Studios. Amidst his shock, another doubt surfaced in Alger's mind. If Mr. Fool had foreseen this, why did he mention that Bansi Harbor's matter is related to Rose Redemption and the King of Angels, Medici? Did he tell us on purpose? He hopes to spread this matter through us. The target is the King of Angels, Medici. No, it's more likely to be the true creator. Mr. Fool has repeatedly thwarted the plans of the true creator before, so it should be no exception this time. The term Rose Redemption appeared in the abandoned temple of the true creator, and it's established by the King of Angels, Medici, and Ouroboros. Clearly, they share a deep connection with the true creator. Bansi Harbor only has our Church of Storms, so the person Mr. Fool is really informing is actually me? Alger vaguely understood something. Then, he became acutely aware of another problem. The last time the world mentioned that something major was about to happen in Backland, it was immediately confirmed by Mr. Fool, and it later involved the awakening of the primordial demonis and the descent of the true creator. This time, the abnormality at Bansi Harbor also received a response from Mr. Fool. He revealed the secret hidden in ancient Binzi and has brought the Rose Redemption and the King of Angels to the forefront of all the members of the Tarot Club. Isn't this too coincidental? Yes, news provided by the world previously had to do with Backland, and this is the first time it involves the sea. Furthermore, Mr. Fool had mentioned last week that his adorer has been forced to leave Backland because of the Great Smog. They match perfectly. So, the world is actually Mr. Fool's adorer. No, he should be a representative among all his adorers in the Tarot Club. He's to do things that Mr. Fool finds inconvenient. Of course, through this gathering, the adorer will also trade goods and knowledge in order to advance himself. This is also considered a form of Mr. Fool's nurturing of him. On careful thought, this theory is probably correct. At least, the world has never collected Roselle's diary in exchange for knowledge or intelligence from Mr. Fool. As his adorer, it's his duty, so he has probably submitted them in private. From this conclusion, some deliberate questions or contradictions on the world's part are meant to conceal his identity as an adorer. This is consistent with his experienced, skilled, and cunning character. In addition to the hidden attempt to awaken as he slowly lifts the seal, Mr. Fool holds the tarot gathering to also use us to interfere in certain events. This is evident from the composition of the members: a high noble, a beyonder at the bishop level of the church, a survivor of the forsaken land of the gods, a student of the Abraham family, an adult vampire. Each of us represents a faction or a particular circle or resource channel. Many thoughts flashed through Alger's mind. Not only was he not repressed by his own guesses, but he was also excited. To him, Mr. Fool's unknown purpose was the most frightening thing. Having an initial understanding of what he wanted to do allowed him to effectively avoid any risks and improve himself by doing so. As long as the Fool wants to use us to do things, he'll definitely give us some benefits. This is exactly what I was hoping for. Otherwise, I don't know when I'll be able to see the hope of becoming a demigod. Heh, the world, you definitely didn't expect that I would see through your disguise. Alger's fear subsided, and he began to think about how to use the information about Bansi Harbor. He couldn't report the matter just like that, as it would arouse suspicion, and he had to patiently wait for an opportunity to let the higher-ups appreciate him and reward him, without ending up being monitored. Audrey could tell that Mr. Hanged Man was undergoing a mental exercise, but she didn't expect him to come up with so many guesses in such a short period of time. And from the words of Mr. Fool, she was delighted to learn that Rose Redemption was a secret organization established by a number of kings of angels, which was also related to the true creator. At the same time, she vaguely sensed the strangeness of the world. She realized that this member of the organization, who was the most difficult to read, was always involved in important matters and could always obtain important information. Furthermore, he constantly produced formulas, ingredients, and beyonder characteristics, as if he could successfully hunt down a beyonder within 1 to 2 weeks. He left Backlund and went to sea. Or was it a rumor he heard in Backlund? Should I tell this information to the church? Well, Mr. Hanged Man has a close relationship with the Church of Storms, so it's better for him to do it, and there wouldn't be any problems. Audrey suppressed the thought of probing and only curiously asked, "Honorable Mr. Fool, what's the title of the King of Angels, Medici? Or should I say, what is his pathway?" Klein leaned back into his chair and said with a deep chuckle, "Red Priest." Red Priest? Which pathway is that? It sounds very similar to the Dark Emperor. Could it be that it's another Sequence 0 title? Audrey thought with excitement and joy. Red Priest. Derek silently muttered the words, realizing that there was no corresponding record in the City of Silver's history. Perhaps I haven't read enough, having only received a general education, he thought regretfully. Furs and Emlyn listened as if they were listening to a story and were equally interested in similar information. The only problem is that I can't brag about it or write it into my novels. Furs felt a pang of regret. Mr. Hanged Man will likely report it to his superiors. Let's hope he doesn't delay it for too long. With his shrewdness, he may have already figured out some of the problems regarding the world and has grasped the relationship between him and the Fool. Fortunately, I've deliberately set up the world to be Sherlock Moriarty since a long time ago, giving him the identity of an adorer. Mr. Hanged Man can at best detect it up to this point, unable to imagine that the world is actually a dummy. Klein raised his hand to his chin, smiled, and said, "Continue." Seeing that Mr. Fool was no longer talking about the subject, Emlyn, who had freed himself from his emotions as a messiah, began to face the difficult problems of reality. That was his lack of money. Regardless, he had never considered selling off his dolls. He only told himself that he needed to be frugal in the future. Only after half a year or even a year could he get himself a new doll, or he could buy a new set of clothes for the dolls he already had. In addition, the only way he could think of making money was to sell some potions that had a miraculous effect, but that could easily bring hidden danger to his clansmen in Backlund. This is an arrangement by the ancestor. Logically speaking, Lord Nibs should provide me help, but Mr. Fool wishes for me to keep it a secret, to be the messiah in the shadows who's burdened with responsibility. I'm not to reveal it on my own accord. After thinking for a few seconds, Emlyn pumped himself up, cleared his throat, and said, "Everyone, I have a question. Here's the matter. Suppose there's a powerhouse who has arranged for you to investigate something. Although you have successfully obtained the information, you are unable to report it to the person due to certain reasons. Then, how can you continue to get support from this powerhouse? Having said this, Emlyn suddenly felt that this act was somewhat shameful. This makes me appear like a traitor and a spy. No, I'm doing this for the sake of the Sanguine's continuation. For this, I have to give up my reputation and bear the burden of being misunderstood. When this is over, and when the truth is revealed, they'll be moved by me. Emlyn quickly eased his prior feelings. At this moment, Audrey, Furs, and Derek cast their eyes towards Alger. In their eyes, Mr. Hanged Man was the most experienced and the best teacher in this field. Klein also thought so too. Alger glanced at the moon and chuckled. It's simple, but you have to take some risks. Emlyn subconsciously denied, it's not me. The Hanged Man replied with a chuckle, let's assume that it's you. He continued his description. You will slowly display a certain level of abnormalities in your daily life, allowing that powerhouse to see that you have a problem. He will have two choices. One is to interrogate you directly, but it will be very easy to end up losing a lead for clues. The second is to inadvertently provide you with help so that you can investigate more thoroughly and then send people to monitor you. I think the second possibility is the most likely. The risk you have to take is how to not reveal the information you want to hide while under surveillance. That works. In fact, I won't be exposed either. Every tarot gathering, I'll be resting in the Harvest Church, looking normal on the outside. As for the sacrifice of items and the receiving of bestowments, they're things that can be shown to Lord Nibs and the others. It will allow them to guess that I have formed some sort of connection with Mr. Fool, but they can't imagine that I've already joined a secret gathering. Very well, while I'm studying history, I'll take the initiative to ask Baron Waymandy about the City of Silver. Emlyn's eyes lit up as he had an idea. He then thought of something and turned to the Hanged Man. Last week, didn't you ask about a way to make everyone on board a ship sleep at the same time? It's very simple. I can provide you with a magical anesthetic gas that can effectively spread without any irritating smells. Even on the deck, one will fall unconscious once they catch a whiff of it. Of course, it's best if you choose a windless night, and that the targets are unable to sense danger, and their physiques cannot be too strong. Those Beyonders that are well known for their physiques in Sequence 9 are the limit. It can cause deep slumber that lasts for more than 3 hours. The effects will constantly decline after that. £100 a can, and an extra £30 for me. The Hanged Man thought about the situation of the sailors on the ghost ship and didn't haggle. Okay. He wanted to erect a certain image in front of the moon, to prepare for the big transaction that would follow. He had thought of using a slumber charm, but that would require him to chant the incantation. It would make the sailors notice that something was wrong and suspect something afterward. At the end of the exchange, Klein tapped the surface of the long, model table with his finger, and he said with a leisurely smile, I can foresee that everyone will present a new appearance of themselves next week. Let us end today's gathering here. Thank you for your blessings. Audrey was the first to stand up. She took her leave, expressing her gratitude. With Mr. Fool saying those words, she felt more confident in consuming the psychiatrist potion. As the magician and the others repeated the same words, one figure after another disappeared from the palace. The area above the grey fog returned to its eternal silence. Chapter 517, City of Generosity Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas Studios Backlund, Sherwood Borough. As the crimson glow faded from her eyes, Furs saw the familiar desk and open notebook which she used to jot down her inspirations. To her, this experience was no longer anything new, but it still evoked reverence from the bottom of her heart. This was a power that didn't belong to humans, something that even demigods were incapable of. I'll receive the stomach pouch of a spirit eater in 2 days. My apprentice potion has already been digested. Finally, I'll become a trick master. I wonder what Beyonder powers I'll receive. By advancing by my own abilities, teacher will definitely place greater importance on me. Apart from potion formulas in the future, perhaps I might be provided with some beyonder ingredients. How I look forward to that very much. I don't even know the corresponding names of sequence 6 and 5. I only know that sequence 7 is astrologer. After I become a trick master, I'll immediately write to teacher. Furs felt like she was one step closer to ridding herself from the curse of the full moon. At this moment, she heard the sound of hurried footsteps approaching. Finally, it turned into the slam of the door. Zio is out again. She's so busy. Furs sighed silently. If not for the £400 debt that she owes Viscount Glaint, we would probably be vacationing at Desi Bay now. After a long period of hard work, and thanks to the enhancement of her strength, certain tasks that were previously impossible for her to complete have become simple. Moreover, from time to time, Zio would receive small tasks that pay well from the Golden Masked Man. Zio has already raised her savings from £110 to £320, leaving her with only £80 left to pay off her debt. In fact, I could spot her £80, but unfortunately, although she isn't tall, she still has a lot of pride in her. Furs withdrew her thoughts and thought about the matter Mr. World had entrusted her. As a doctor and a writer, she didn't know much about radios or anything about the entire field of machinery. She didn't usually pay attention to such information when reading the newspapers, so she didn't know where she could buy the kind of transceiver the world wanted. A department store. It probably doesn't sell one. Ah right, Avil writes science fiction, so he should know a lot about such matters. Furs quickly found the right person to consult. However, she immediately had a new problem. Was she to visit him directly, or was she to write him a letter of inquiry? Glancing at the chair covered in a thick, soft blanket, and smelling the fragrance of coffee and tobacco emanating the room, she felt a warmth slowly creeping through her body. Bit by bit, her motivation to leave the house crumbled. I'm not familiar with him, so I shouldn't rashly pay him a visit. She sat down with a grunt and unfolded a piece of paper. In the Berg household in the City of Silver. Derek opened his eyes and woke up from feigning sleep. According to his original plan, he would have immediately held a sacrificial ritual to send out the stomach pouch of the Spirit Eater. However, the words of the Hanged Man reminded him to be more cautious and make more observations. I'll gather the ingredients Mr. Hanged Man require first, and then I'll do the sacrificial ritual all at once. Derek remained silent for a few seconds, then he attached his axe of hurricane to his body and headed for the steeple. He first checked the items available for exchanging using merit points, but he wasn't in a hurry to complete the transaction. He planned to go to the underground market to take a look once the lightning in the sky subsided. Derek went up to the third floor and headed straight for the library section that dealt with mythology and ancient classics, hungering for valuable information he hadn't learned yet. Suddenly, he saw a hard and yellowed book with a cover, Giant King's Court, Book of Blackrock, hand-copied edition. It's a record passed down from the Giant King's Court. I wonder if there's anything related to the Kings of Angels. Derek reached for the book, pulled it out, and saw that it was bound in a brown monster hide. At that moment, on the upper level of the library, Colin Iliad was wearing a flaxen-colored linen shirt and a brown coat and standing there quietly, looking down. His unkempt grizzled hair flailed in the breeze from the window, and his pale blue eyes were deep and reserved. Wednesday, January 12th. 5:40 p.m. The sky was dark and cloudy, with deep blue waves undulating across the sea. The white agate bobbed up and down in this storm, like a toy in the palm of a giant. This is the sea. No matter how powerful one is, one will appear insignificant in front of it. Danet stood by the window and enjoyed the scenery outside. Fortunately, we're almost at the City of Generosity. From the moment they left Bansi Harbor, the White Agate's journey had been smooth sailing. With the help of the wind, it reached a stable speed of 15 knots. Hence, even though they arrived at Tiana Port a little later than scheduled, they completed the entire journey half a day earlier. That is to say, the white agate, which was scheduled to arrive at the City of Generosity on the morning of the 13th, arrived on the evening of the 12th. Hearing Dannett's reflections, Klein just glanced up at him, then looked away and continued his contemplation. The more he played the part of Gairman Sparrow, and the more he had to force himself to behave in accordance with his persona, the more deeply he realized what kind of person he was. When faced with different situations, he realized that the choices he really wanted to make were different from Gairman Sparrow's. For example, he would have responded to Dannett's by idly chatting with him about the weather at sea and the disasters caused by those terrible storms, but Gairman Sparrow wouldn't. He had to be cold and reserved. The more there are such differences, the more I recognize myself. Klein sighed inwardly. This was something he hadn't experienced when he moved about with his identity as the private detective, Sherlock Moriarty. Back then, he didn't have to disguise his personality and had just been himself. I feel like I've digested my potion a little. However, Gairman Sparrow has traits that are similar to myself. At the very least, when choosing to disembark and entering Bansi Harbor to save the others, I overlapped with this identity of mine, and there was no difference. Of course, it could also be said that I was adding a certain kind of persona into the mix. Beneath Gairman Sparrow's gentleness and madness, he has a kind, brave, and compassionate heart that values relationships. Heh, I can't boast about myself. If I had known earlier that Bansi was Binzi, I would have most likely been terrified. Not necessarily. At the very least, the danger which was divined was within an acceptable range. Klein thought, summing things up as he engaged in self-deprecation. This made him more aware of a problem. Although playing the role of a purely fictional person could help him digest the potion, he needed to replace an existing identity to speed up and improve his progress. He needed to gain the affirmation of people from the other person's interpersonal relationships, feel the corresponding emotions of joy, anger, sadness, and immersing himself in them, but not getting obsessed. Become anyone, but ultimately become yourself in the end. And get feedback from the people involved. Klein looked at the pale yellow carpet, his mind racing. Seeing Gairman Sparrow without a response, Dannett spread his hands helplessly, feeling bored out of his mind. This crazy guy is good in every way other than making me do what servants do. There's only one thing, he doesn't like to talk. There's a communication barrier with him. If this goes on, I'll definitely go crazy. Fortunately, I'm finally at Byam. I can finally be free. Dannett felt that he would sooner or later develop a habit of talking to himself when faced with a similar silence. After a while he saw Gairman Sparrow look up, smile, and say, "You can tell me about the pirate point of contacts in Byam." Dogs hit. It's better if you don't say anything. Dannett's expression twisted. Whoosh. At 6:15 p.m., just before the storm arrived, the white agate docked smoothly and arrived at the capital of the Rorsted Archipelago, Byam, the City of Generosity. It was also known as the Spice Archipelago, and it was home to a variety of exotic spices, with the plantations of these produce being mainstays of the economy. The Blue Mountain Island, where Byam was located, occupied more than half of the archipelago, which was mostly covered in forest. It had gold, silver, copper, coal, iron, and other minerals, as well as a plentiful variety of fruits due to the particularly fertile land. For these reasons, the first batch of colonists named the seaside city they built the City of Generosity. They believed it was a land of treasure promised by the gods, where it flowed with milk and honey. Klein picked up his suitcase which Dannett packed, and he left room 312, entering the corridor that led to the deck. Without any surprises, he met Donna's family, Cleves, and others. The two siblings were still a little afraid of Klein after the fright he gave them. They hid behind their parents and bodyguards and didn't dare to speak, appearing like deflated balloons. Klein nodded slightly as a form of greeting. At this moment, Bertie Branch hesitated for a second and then took a half step forward. "Mr. Sparrow, will you be staying in Byam?" If I wish to hire, no, request for your help, how can I contact you? He's indeed a businessman with a spirit of adventure. Even if he's afraid, he still wishes to befriend someone with beyonder powers. Klein thought for a moment. What newspapers are in circulation over here? The Sonia Morning Post and the News Report are popular in the archipelago, Bertie said without any thought. Put an advertisement in the Sonia Morning Post for 3 days in a row asking to buy Demir's special cured meat, and leave an address. I'll go look for you, and if I don't show up 3 days later, it means I'm at sea again. Klein was careful to give a one-way method of contact. All right. Bertie exhaled and smiled. Clevis and the others expressed their gratitude once again and left the cabin in an orderly manner. Noticing the gangway in sight, Donna suddenly slowed her pace and stepped back next to Klein, raised her face, and bit her lip. Uncle Sparrow, since that kind of power definitely brings about threats and madness, why did you choose to have it? She had thought about this question for a long time before finally mustering the courage to ask. Klein was startled, and he instinctively formed a smile. For my dream. Then he lowered his voice and said 2 words, and, protect. Protect. Donna mumbled the word in a slightly lost voice, picked up her pace, and caught up with her parents. After watching the Branch family leave the White Agate, Klein retracted his gaze and said to Danitz, "You're free." Ah. For a moment, Danitz wasn't used to it. Chapter 518, On the Brink of Death. Translator, Atlas Studios. Editor, Atlas Studios. Without another word or care for Danitz, Klein pressed his top hat and carried his suitcase down the gangway. Are you really going to let me go? Blazing Danitz stood on the deck, his face filled with suspicion. Although he had expected such an outcome, with Gehrman Sparrow directly letting him go while in Demir Harbor, making him capable of imagining today's scene, he still couldn't believe it. He felt that everything that befell him came too simply and easily. Regardless, I'm worth 3,000 pounds. No, this is the bounty offered only by loan. Isn't this madman, Gehrman Sparrow, an adventurer? How can he let go of a huge amount of wealth in front of him? It's incomprehensible. It's true that normal people can't understand the mindset of lunatics. Danitz gradually snapped back to his senses. With his luggage in hand, he carefully descended the gangway and stepped onto the concrete ground of the dock. He straightened his back, lifted his head, and gave Gehrman Sparrow's back a glance. He realized that he really wasn't turning back and was following the path straight for Coastal Street. Danitz didn't dare delay a second longer. He immediately turned around and left through another path, occasionally changing directions and using obstacles to look back, in order to ensure that he wasn't followed. Soon, he arrived at a row of houses near the warehouse at the dock. Gehrman Sparrow really didn't use me as bait. After triple-checking, Danitz finally relaxed completely. At this moment, he finally felt like he was liberated. A dignified bosun of a pirate admiral like him no longer had to be bullied and be ordered around like a servant. I can already foresee that tomorrow will be incomparably beautiful. There will be a group of people vying to flatter me, wanting to become my servants. Danitz knocked happily on the door, 3 long and 3 short, rhythmically. Gehrman Sparrow asked me to give him the pirate point of contacts in Byam. I obviously only told him the ones that don't have a good relationship with us. There's no way he could guess that our Golden Dream point of contact is right at the dock. Danitz picked at his nose and breathed in the fresh sea breeze before a looming rain. Byam was a pivotal location of the Lone Kingdom's Sonia Sea colonies. It was one of the largest cities in the region. There were many powerful official beyonders, and no matter how rampant the pirates were, they didn't dare to openly show their faces here. Most of the time, they had to rely on the local gangs or people with backgrounds to handle the loot and purchase any necessities. Of course, this didn't mean that they wouldn't come to Byam. The Red Theater here was the most famous brothel in the surrounding seas, and countless pirates came to patronize this famous place. Even if 1 or 2 of their peers were caught every once in a while, it didn't stop them from rushing over. In addition to the spice trade, the brothel industry was another major pillar of the Rörsted archipelago. Apart from the Red Theatre, there were many big or small brothels, out in the open or hidden all over the place. They fully satisfied the desires of the seamen with ample energy. As for the female pirates, they didn't have to worry about this problem. As long as they were willing, they could always be satisfied. After all, there was more demand than supply. At sea, where faith in the Lord of Storms was mainstream, there had always been few females. Similarly, the underground trade related to beyonder ingredients and mysticism was quite frequent here, and there were many circles. Those smaller ports are still better. We don't have to be afraid of being discovered at all, and we can just openly sit in a bar, engage in disputes with adventurers, and even fight them. As long as we don't cause any trouble or cause any deaths, the local official beyonders will turn a blind eye. With their strength, they typically have to take on tremendous risks if they wish to interfere. Danitz thought mockingly. At that moment, he heard footsteps and saw the door creak open. A familiar face entered his sight. "Old man, did you not drink today?" Danitz smiled and greeted. Standing at the door was one of the Golden Dream's contacts in the Rörsted archipelago, Old Rin. Old Rin coughed twice and made way. Danitz stepped into the dim room, his nose twitching suddenly. He caught a whiff of Lanti-proof. No, Old Rin likes to drink locally produced Byam Black Rand. As this thought flashed through his mind, Danitz was terrified. Immediately following that, he saw a man with his back to him rise to his feet. He was tall, dark, and muscular, and his hair was curled like marbles. Steel Mavedi. Danitz's pupils contracted sharply. This was the second mate of the Admiral of Blood, a great pirate with a bounty of 6,000 pounds. Waves of the sea breeze blew, swaying the thin, sharp leaves of the tree in a precarious manner. Klein was walking along Coastal Street at an adequate speed. In contrast, the people around him were hurrying and walking quickly. His spiritual intuition told him that it would take some time before the storm would arrive, and that he had plenty of time to find a hotel. Whoosh! The sound of the wind grew louder and louder. Tree branches fell to the ground, and there weren't many people left on the street. Klein was about to turn into another alley when he heard the sound of hasty but disorderly running. Tap! 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 Danitz was running with all his might, but the scene in front of him began to rock. He felt an abnormal pain from his wound as he felt his vitality rapidly sapping away. His spirit body had partially left his body, approaching the legendary underworld. As for the surrounding sounds, he could only vaguely hear them, and everything in his line of sight looked like it wasn't real. If it wasn't for having Shadow Cloak, the ambush would have killed him. But even so, he was still severely injured and could die on the streets at any moment. He was forced to run towards Coastal Street because of his will to warn the captain that their point of contact had been compromised by the Admiral of Blood, as well as the glimmer of hope brought by that crazy but powerful figure. If it's him, then he would definitely be able to escape from the hands of Steel Mavedi's henchmen. Danitz began to stagger, and his body gradually grew cold. Just as he was about to collapse, he saw Gehrman Sparrow standing by a street corner. His refined face that hid madness appeared so genial at that moment. Plop! Danitz fell on his back, his hands hanging limply over his chest, revealing a hideous, exaggerated wound that was inflicted to his organs. Tell Captain that Old Rin has been discovered. Steel Mavedi did it for that treasure. Danitz saw Gehrman Sparrow kneel to his side as he hurriedly spoke. Klein recalled the bounty offered for Steel Mavedi and asked in return, Admiral of Blood? Yes, tell Captain. Tell Captain. Danitz gasped as he said. After saying all that, he revealed a mournful smile. Don't worry about me. I'm about to die soon. Tell the captain that all the money I've saved up has been turned into real estate. Units 12 to 16 on Byam's Amiris Avenue. The title deeds are hidden in the wall of Unit 13's basement. Help me sell them. T. Take the money to South Intis's Elama town. G. Give the money to my parents. S. Say that I've really made a fortune. Danitz paused, then he said with great difficulty, S. Say that I've become an outstanding adventurer. Also. Help me. S. Say I'm sorry. His eyes suddenly became moist, as if he was recalling that rebellious youth from back then. I'm sorry, old man, mother. I'm unable to return home. Danitz's vision darkened, and he felt that his life was coming to an end. It was at this moment that he saw Gehrman Sparrow reach out and press his hand to his wound and then swipe it. Danitz's sorrow came to a sudden halt as he felt the already numb pain in his chest and abdomen suddenly disappear as his left hand seemed to suffer a fracture. He looked at Klein blankly, and Klein looked back at him quietly. None of them spoke for 2 seconds. Finally, he looked down in astonishment and discovered that his lethal wound had strangely healed. His left arm was badly mutilated, and even his bones protruded out. I am fine now. Danitz blinked, still immersed in the sadness and frustration of his brush with death. Why didn't you treat me first? He asked blankly. Klein looked back at the empty area on the other side of Coastal Street and said in a calm tone, waiting for you to finish. That's basic courtesy. Courtesy, you son of a b*tch. I was really saying my last words. With a sudden jerk of his back, Danitz rolled to his feet. He warily looked towards the dock, where a thick cloud of smoke was rising. It was none other than the result of the battle he had just been engaged in. Because the house was set on fire by me, Steel Mavedi was afraid that it would catch the attention of the official Beyonders. As he was confused by that shadow, he didn't chase after me. Danitz instantly understood the sequence of events. Let's find a place to stay first. Klein spread his hands and caught a drop of rain. Not knowing whether or not he had completely escaped danger, Danitz immediately nodded. Okay. I can tell that this madman, Gehrman Sparrow, isn't afraid of Steel Mavedi at all. He's not even afraid of Admiral of Blood. At such times, I especially admire his craziness. Damn, I exposed my wealth to him. Danitz had just exhaled when his body froze. Klein walked silently ahead with his suitcase and cane with only one thought echoing in his head. God *mit, a pirate is richer than I am. Empress Burrow. Audrey, who was about to leave Backlund, hid in her chemistry laboratory and concocted the psychiatrist potion with the ingredients she received from Mr. Vampire, the fruit of the Tree of Elders, the blood of a mirror dragon, and the other ingredients she had collected previously. This time, she didn't get Susie to guard the door. Instead, she was to sit inside and observe the whole process from the sidelines. Earl Hall had already instructed everyone to not approach the young lady during her experiments, but they had to pay attention to any unusual changes. Phew. Audrey let out a small sigh of relief, pouring the completed potion into a prepared glass bottle. The slightly golden liquid rippled like a deformed, gigantic pupil. Its gaze seemed to shine right into the eyes of anyone's heart. Susie, did you remember the process? You are a mature Beyonder. In the future, you'll have to learn how to concoct your own potion. No, it's not that I'm not helping you, it's just that I'm pointing out a possibility. Sometimes, I might not be by your side, and you just happen to need a potion bottle, Audrey said happily to the huge golden retriever. Susie was so confused by what she was taught, and she could only open her mouth to reply with a single word, woof. Converging her emotions, Audrey raised her head and downed the psychiatrist potion bottle. Chapter 519, Naming Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas Studios. The golden liquid was cool and refreshing, making Audrey feel as if she was enjoying a delicious ice cream. She then took a sip of champagne. Tiny bubbles of air continuously rose, silently bursting as they brought a tingling sensation with them. Suddenly, her sense of hearing reached out, and she could hear the conversation of the two maids at the end of the corridor as they lamented at how they had no chance of going to the Hall family's castle and manor in Eastchester County. At this moment, Audrey felt as if she had dissolved into an illusory gas and was rapidly expanding. It filled the entire room, overlapping with a sea formed from everyone's sea of consciousness. Her vision also changed. Everything she saw was abnormally smooth, turning into a mirror that reflected her current appearance. Possessing a beauty described by pure, exquisite, grand, and witty, golden scales that were slowly growing out of her exposed skin, her emerald green irises contracted and were dyed in a faint golden color, as if they had turned vertical. Audrey suddenly felt fear from the bottom of her heart when she saw herself like this. She didn't want or wish to become an inhuman monster. With a hum, her mind began to turn into a blur, as if something was slowly and painfully drilling out from the surface of her body. Just then, she heard the gentle voice of her huge golden retriever, Susie. "Don't be afraid, calm down. Don't be afraid, calm down." Audrey recovered her thoughts and tried to get herself into a spectator state. Her undulating emotions quickly calmed down, and her spirit seemed to leave her body. She then looked down at herself like a spectator. Audrey saw the golden scales on the surface of her body visibly recede and her emerald-like eyes return to normal. It didn't take her long to regain control of her body and understand what beyond her powers were available to a psychiatrist and how they were used. It was so dangerous just now. Audrey raised her hand in fear. Her skin was fair and delicate, completely unlike the abnormal condition she had been in a moment ago. After this incident, she truly understood how terrifying the danger of losing control which Mr. Fool would occasionally bring up was. She gained a deep understanding of how difficult it was to go down the Beyonder path. Even with the acting method, it was impossible to completely remove the latent risks. At one gathering, Mr. World said that Beyonders are a bunch of miserable wretches that are constantly fighting against threats and madness. Previously, I could only understand it literally. Now, I can finally feel the weight behind this sentence. Audrey, don't be discouraged, don't be afraid. Father, mother, and brother are still waiting for your protection. With this experience, you won't be frightened by yourself in the future or so easily lose control. You can do it. Audrey clenched her fists and encouraged herself. She calmed down for 2 seconds, walked up to Susie, squatted down, and hugged the golden retriever. As she combed its fur, she put her head against the side of the dog's face and muttered in its warmth, "Thank you, thank you." Susie rubbed against her twice and asked seriously, "Audrey, is this how a psychiatrist feels like?" "I like it very much." Audrey was suddenly at a loss on whether to laugh or cry. She immediately pursed her lips and promised, "Susie, we'll treat each other in the future." "Yes, psychological problems." "Okay, woof." Susie answered happily. It was only now with Audrey truly recovering that she was in the mood to examine her own advancement. "My body seems to have become healthier. Although I don't have any obvious muscles, my strength and speed have become much stronger than before. My eyesight has also improved. I can even clearly see items hidden in the dark. My sense of smell is able to distinguish even more subtle smells, and thus being able to grasp a target's truest emotions and thoughts. I finally have beyonder powers in the truest sense of the word. Yes, there's also awe. I can target a single person or apply it to a group of people within a certain range. They'll instantly panic and turn chaotic as though they're facing a dragon. Another is frenzy. It will trigger the emotions and mental state of a target, throwing the target into a frenzy. They'll suffer intense psychological damage and might even cause direct loss of control at times. Another is psychological cue. Through specific methods, words, and a medium, I can cue a target, letting them abide by my arrangements without them realizing it. Or they might strongly abide by a particular promise from the bottom of their hearts. Another is placate, also known as psychoanalysis. I can help beyonders on the brink of losing control to regain their reason and escape danger. There's a certain chance of failure. The higher my sequence, the more easily it will succeed. It can calm down various psychological instabilities and allow for communication. Another is telepathy. Through mediums like candlelight and extracts, it will put the target in a partially hypnotic state. I'll then be able to directly communicate with their body of heart and mind, just like what Hilbert Alucard did to me. If not for the protection provided by Mr. Fool's angel, then I wouldn't have the means to lie under such situations. Yes. I have to be on guard against such techniques. I can't be fooled by a target, and there should be quite a number of means to achieve this effect. With placate and telepathy, together with certain psychology knowledge, I'll be able to act as a true psychiatrist, the kind that can open a clinic. Audrey's mood rapidly improved. She finally had the feeling that she had matured and become a qualified beyonder. I'm a mid-sequence beyonder. There really is a qualitative change. She stood up, lifted her skirt, and walked briskly around in a circle. She quickly discovered that she was still lacking in direct offensive abilities as a psychiatrist. Fortunately, I have this. Audrey stopped in front of the experiment table and opened a plain brown box. Inside the box was a silver mask that could only cover half a face. It was the mystical item that the hanged man had sold her. Audrey picked it up, placed it in her palm, and observed it for a few seconds. Then, she extended her spirituality and projected her thoughts just like how she did above the gray fog. She saw the silver mask begin to warp inwards, turning into a hollow, finely patterned slightly large earring. It might be better to turn it into a necklace, Audrey whispered. Afterward, she tried out the various abilities of this magical item. She was most satisfied with her ability to fine-tune her appearance. It's a pity that other than flame controlling, it doesn't have any other more direct offensive powers. Perhaps I'll need to prepare a revolver, one that has beyonder effects. Audrey thought with some regret. She quickly collected her emotions and said to the mystical item in her hand with an uplifted tone towards the end, "From today, your name is Lie. The most beautiful Lie, City of Generosity, Byam. 48, Acid Lemon Street, Wind of Azure Inn." It was raining heavily outside and the wind was raging, but inside the luxurious suite, the fireplace was warm and the environment peaceful. Klein sat in his chair and watched silently as Blazing Danitz dealt with the severe fracture on his left arm. He waited until Danitz was finished binding up his arm with shredded, old clothes before asking bluntly, "What treasure?" According to Danitz, it was because of some treasure that Admiral of Blood Senior wanted to deal with Vice Admiral Edwina Edwards. The sound of wind and rain came through the window. Danitz took a sip of the Lanty-proof on the table and then gave a bitter, angry laugh. Those holes who had their brains eaten by zombies. On our last expedition, we found a sunken ship. Although we didn't find anything of great value, we discovered a gigantic black iron key that doesn't look like the kind used by humans. Can you imagine? After being submerged under the sea for so many years, it hasn't rusted at all. Yes, Klein replied in a concise manner. In a world where extraordinariness and mystery intertwined, what wasn't possible? There were people who could be resurrected from the dead, not to mention others. Danitz choked and paused for 7 or 8 seconds before he knew what to say next. Perhaps there's a traitor among us, and the news has spread. Countless pirates believe that this is Death's key, a key that can open the treasure trove Death left behind. I thought that this problem would be cleared up very quickly and happily applied for a vacation. In the end, the matter became more complicated. Even Admiral of Blood has joined the ranks of these mad pirates. I'm even beginning to suspect that it's Death's key, a key that can turn one into a true god. Foolish. Klein calmly gave his evaluation. Whether it was in the divination domain or dealing with deities, he could be considered experienced. Thus, he had his own understanding and confidence in the interpretation of Death's key. He believed that the key was a form of revelation, a symbol. The thing that opened Death's treasure trove was probably not in the shape of a key, but some kind of characteristic, bloodline, or even certain, specified people and their descendants. Danitz was startled for 2 seconds, and then he exclaimed, "Your words are exactly the same as Captain's previous comments, and even your expressions are very similar." She suspects that the key belongs to an older era, an era not of humans. Before the cataclysm, this world was still full of giants, dragons, elves, and demonic wolves. The shape of the key indirectly points to one of them. Demonic wolves. Klein suddenly recalled the ravings he often heard during his past advancements. In it, the Phlegria he heard referred to the ancient god, Annihilation demonic wolf. A treasure that involves the second epoch. He held back his curiosity and switched to calmly saying, "Write down everything that Admiral of Blood has done, including Steel Mavedi and his men." He remembered that Admiral of Blood and his pirate crew were the most notorious groups on the ocean. Their hands were stained with blood as they committed heinous sins. How can I remember? They aren't beauties like Captain. Danitz threw up his hands. I can only list the most important things and some of the details that have left an impression on me. Wait, what do you want to do? Bit by bit, Klein revealed a smile, one that gave Danitz a fright. He said in a deep voice, "If it's appropriate, I want to hunt them." Chapter 520, Admiral of Blood Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas Studios, hunt them? Danitz asked subconsciously. When he truly understood the meaning behind Gehrman Sparrow's words, he instantly became excited. He changed his seating posture and suppressed his voice. "Is there anything I can help you with?" As a qualified, part-time pirate, he had nothing to do with beautiful words such as tolerance, compassion, and love. Since he had nearly died at the hands of Steel Mavedi and now had the chance to take revenge, he definitely wouldn't miss it. He believed that he could survive in the pirate industry by relying on an accurate grasp of the situation, knowing when to resist, when to fight for his life, when to feign ignorance when seeing his enemies, and when to settle old scores. And now, this was an opportunity. Danitz still couldn't make an accurate judgment on how powerful Gehrman Sparrow was, but judging from how he had taken care of the fallen Bishop Millet within 10 seconds, it was unlikely that it would be too difficult for him to deal with Steel Mavedi. Even if he encountered the Admiral of Blood, Senor, it wasn't impossible for him to win. Of course, this is in a one-on-one situation, and pirates never talk about chivalry, Danitz thought to himself. Klein leaned forward a little, placed his elbows on his knees, and clasped his hands. "I've told you." "Ah. What?" Danitz felt that he was often unable to keep up with Gehrman Sparrow's train of thought. With regards to this, he could only console himself that a normal person and a madman were different. Seeing that the other party had stopped talking, he thought for a while and finally remembered what he had to do. Write down everything that Admiral of Blood and his pirate crew had done. Gehrman Sparrow definitely wants to know how many things they've plundered. Danitz quickly gathered his thoughts, rummaged around the room for a pen and paper, and scribbled a chunk of text. During this process, he was exceptionally glad that it was his left arm that was injured. When he was done writing, Klein reached out for it, read it carefully, and confirmed from the undetailed parts of Danitz's description that Admiral of Blood was the most typical and vile of pirates. Not only did they plunder, but they also abducted people, slaughtered crew members, and abused women. A pirate like Danitz actually knows how to write ancient Fasak. He's also been educated. After muttering to himself, Klein took out a copper penny and used divination to confirm the authenticity of the material. Then he said in a tone as though he was giving instructions on what was to be eaten tomorrow morning, "Tell me about the Admiral of Blood and his men. He needs more detailed information. Is he preparing to hunt them?" Danitz was delighted, hating himself for not knowing enough. Admiral of Blood Senor is suspected to be an evil spirit. Anyone who has encountered him has died a bizarre death. Either they strangle themselves to death, blow their mouths up, hug bombs, or slaughter their companions. Captain said that it's the possession of an evil spirit. It's very similar to Miss Sharon's Beyond Her Powers. Wraith? Klein didn't speak as he listened to Danitz go on, in silence. Senor can make a terrible shriek. The last time I fought them, I was nearly knocked unconscious and fell off the deck and into the sea. Heh, I returned the favor and set one of their boats on fire. Senor knows a lot of undead magic. Cruel, bloodthirsty, and full of desire. His targets can be either male or female, and even humanoid creatures. Consistent with the unrestrained nature of the Rose school of thought. Yes, accurately speaking, it's a trait of the prisoner pathway. The highest probability is that he's a wraith. Klein nodded thoughtfully. In response, Danitz became more active and spoke a little faster. Our captain thinks that Senor has a very powerful mystical item on him, one that makes him very lucky. He always seems to gain the favor of the gods. For example, at a critical moment, his opponent would suddenly slip or have their powers fail. Another example is winning 21 bets in a row. A mystical item that can make someone lucky. This is very rare. It's from the monster pathway. Or is it connected to some other evil spirit? Klein guessed based on his own knowledge of mysticism. I've never directly fought Senor, so that's all I know. Danitz wanted to throw his hands up, but he was stopped by the pain in his left arm. He has about 7 or 8 ships. His flagship is the Tree of Flesh and Blood. Heh, that's different from us. We mainly seek out treasure and wouldn't take in anyone. Therefore, we only have the Golden Dream. It's no wonder the Admiral of Blood's bounty is much higher than Vice Admiral Iceberg, reaching 42,000 pounds. In terms of strength, he should be a bit stronger. Klein immediately gained an understanding. He maintained the same posture as before, seemingly unaffected by the intelligence regarding the Admiral of Blood. What about his subordinates? Danitz was long prepared as he immediately said, Senor has 10 of his strongest men under his command, the first, second, third mates of the flagship, and the captain of each ship. Steel Mavedi is the second mate of the flagship. We think that he's a sequence 6. His body is like steel and is able to withstand bullets and cannonballs. He isn't afraid of fire, drowning, and various magic. He's strong and fast. He can rip his opponent apart, and he grasps a certain level of undead-related spells. He can summon zombies and rear puppets, zombie. Klein immediately thought of Merrick who played cards with zombies. Based on the wraith traits of Admiral of Blood Senor, can it be assumed that these pirates are actually part of the outer circle of the Rose School of Thought, or perhaps they're from an organization used to make money? It's a pity that I don't have a messenger, nor did I ask Miss Sharon if she had one. Otherwise, I could contact her and confirm the Admiral of Blood's identity. Klein guessed with some regret. He didn't give up just because this matter might involve the Rose School of Thought. In any case, he could change his face and identity afterwards. In addition, he had involved himself with the Aurora Order, the Demonist Sect, Rose Redemption, and Twilight Hermit Order, so he wasn't afraid of offending another entity. Actually, it's not like I've never fought against the Rose School of Thought. I've already killed a wraith, a zombie, and a wraith, and I've robbed the Scarlet Lunar Corona and biological poison bottle. Klein suddenly realized how much trouble he had been involved in. It's unlikely that Mavedi has any particularly powerful mystical items, otherwise, I might not have been able to escape before, Danitz said, feeling somewhat relieved at his luck. He has a bunch of puppets and zombies by his side, as well as several subordinates at sequence 7 or 8. As the second mate of the flagship, he should be the leader of the crew in the vicinity since he's here. We can consider hunting him first. Below the high sequences, once the number of Beyonders reaches a certain amount, a qualitative change will occur. With the combination of different abilities, it's possible for a group to defeat a Beyonder stronger than themselves. It's just like how a Nighthawk's team can definitely take down a sequence 6, or even a sequence 5. Klein didn't underestimate Steel Mavedi and his men just because he was stronger with creeping hunger. He was still as cautious as before. I have to plan and prepare well. Well, the frequency bands and passcodes I received from White Shark will come in handy, and once Miss Magician's radio transceiver is delivered, I'll get Danitz to frequently monitor the frequency and see if we can glean any information, allowing me to go in quickly to reap the harvest. And I can take advantage of this period to explore the possibility of true acting. Soon, Klein formulated a plan as he continued to listen to Danitz tell him about the rest of Admiral of Blood subordinates. After a while, when Danitz was finally done, he summarized enthusiastically, "If Steel Mavady can be killed, leaving my name behind, this matter will definitely go on the papers. Once it's spread, I no longer need to worry about informing Captain." He was afraid that a traitor was among their ranks and that all the points of contact in the Worsted archipelago were under the enemy's control. Therefore, he didn't dare to rashly make contact. He was still vexed over the problem of alerting his captain. "He actually has a brain." Klein nodded and said, "You're in charge of gathering information on all aspects of steel." "All right." Danitz replied with a grim smile, thinking of the punch that had nearly pierced his heart in the evening. Klein slowly stood up and walked towards the window. It was dark outside with howling winds and pouring rain. It looked as if the end of the world had arrived. Thinking of what he was going to do next, he couldn't help but feel like he was acting in a certain sense. Smiling, he muttered to himself in a low voice, "Tonight, Gehrman joins the hunt. City of Generosity, Byam, in the Cathedral of Waves." Alger Wilson, who had received the Sanguine's anesthetic gas, was about to sail out to sea for another of the Windblast's main ingredients, when he was summoned by the local diocese bishop. There have been rumors recently that Vice Admiral Iceberg received death's key. All the pirates in the Sonia Sea are roused by this, the bishop said in a heavy voice. "Investigate this matter." He was an old man with a head full of white hair, but he was still as energetic as ever. His speech was even faster than a young man's, as though he could charge out at any moment and personally resolve all problems. His body was strong, his muscles bulging with his bishop's robe. The wind howled around him as he breathed, and the air was moist. There are similar rumors every year, but they all end up being fake. Such rumors are commonly spread across the sea. Even if it's true, I don't have the right to be involved. There's no need to take the risk. I'll just go through the motions and skirt the edge of this matter." Alger muttered inwardly. He solemnly clenched his fist and struck his left breast. "Yes, Your Excellency. May the storm be with you." Diocese Bishop Chogo was very pleased with Alger's attitude and returned the same salute. "May the storm be with you." The encouraged Alger Wilson quickly left the cathedral and returned to the square outside. The storm last night had subsided, and only the scattered leaves and water puddles on the ground remained as evidence of its coming. After taking a breath of after-rain fresh air, Alger decided to visit the few places where pirates roamed. He planned to put on a show of working hard by trying to seek out information. If he were to meet a fellow with a bounty of a few £100, he wouldn't mind apprehending the poor bastard. In his opinion, they were liquid cash flow that could be added to his savings.